I was thinking about this week. I was thinking about like, when it comes to people, when it comes to like the people that I want to like hang out with for a long time, I used to, had like coaching on leadership, and they were talking about like interviewing people. Have you ever heard this question? Like the internal question is, would you like to be on an airplane with them for like a cross-country trip? And I started thinking about that. I was like, that was really great. As I was thinking about it, I had an interview years and years ago with some people, and as I was doing it, there was something interesting. Like I was talking to the person, and this is back when Razr phones were out. Do you guys remember Razr phones? Do you remember if you don't, that's like a flip phone that didn't have real internet. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, and you paid by that. And I'll never forget this. I was talking to this person. As I was talking to them, something happened that was so fascinating. They were talking to me, but while they were talking to me, their Razr was up and they were texting on the Razr mid-conversation. Have you guys ever experienced this before? Where somebody was like experiencing the fullness of like a distraction. And I got to thinking to myself, I was like, of all of the things that I think would probably be like my biggest pet peeve, that would be one of the ones. Like when you're in the middle of a conversation, you ever experienced this before? And someone has the phone out and they're like mid-text, but when it was a Razr phone, you know this, you didn't have like letters. Sorry, I feel like I'm helping some people understand how this worked back in the day because I'm old. You had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, and they had 3 letters. Do you remember this? And you had to like find it. And so it was a very long, short text message. It was a very long amount of time and a very short text message they were sending. And I got into thinking, I was like, there's something about distraction like that just irks me. How many of you have ever experienced that with somebody else before, where you're like in the middle of a thing and they were just like texting, and I thought about this. I was like, that distraction thing is so fascinating and you've heard me tell versions of this story before, like variations of it, but I've told a story about how my kids will do this to me though. Like I will be on my phone, and my kids were really young. They would grab my face and like pull my face to like in front of them because they wanted the fullness of my attention. And so I realized like the thing that was like peeving me, is that a verb? We made it a verb? Peeving me is something that I fully embody and embrace fairly frequently. Like the level of distraction that I have is pretty high a lot of times, and sometimes even with people. I realize that I'm the person on the phone sometimes. I realize that there are things that I can just find myself wildly distracted by. How many of you have how many of you have all of the like social media things? If you have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, anybody, how many of you have more than 2? Let's do that. If you have more than 2 of these, yeah? How many of you have like 3 of them or more? Like you're on TikTok too? Yeah, I felt like a whole name. Yeah, that was pretty good. I should rename that. I got to thinking about this. I was like, there's something about those things that can just capture my attention for hours. I was so against TikTok in the beginning because I thought it was just all people dancing in the kitchen. And then I realized, no, they have so much more content than this. And I realized how many hours I can spend just fully in a mode of distraction. And then I said this a few months ago, and we talked about this a little bit. But I thought to myself, I was like, the level of distraction that I could find myself with is so high, and the places that I need to find myself fully focused oftentimes is so low, and it's often just a discipline that I experience. Now, what we're gonna do today is we started talking several weeks ago about something that I think was so fascinating, at least for me. We started talking about how everybody is created to create. Sorry, I'm gonna get us all caught up on the same page. If we can go to that first verse, Grant, let's go to the first verse. When we look at this first verse, we were looking at this when we first started, and we looked at the very beginning in Genesis. We said, so God created mankind in his own image. The image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. And so we talked about they get created, and once they get created, God gives them a purpose, and this is kind of where we kind of launched from there. It said God blessed them, said to them, be fruitful, increase in number, which means exactly what you think it means. Fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And we said this as we looked at it, we said ultimately, at the very beginning of all creation, you were created to create. You were created to create with your word. You were created to create with your hands. You were created to create with your life. So much of the human existence is you creating good in the world. This is part of what being a follower of Jesus is. And then we said this very simply, our role was twofold, naming, right? So there's a part of this with language. You were naming, it's the subduing part, naming, and then you were framing and reframing to bring about good, right? And this is what the human response is, especially in fun years that are election seasons, right? So these are kind of like moments where you feel the weight of this over and over again. Part of our role is those things. Now, what we're gonna talk about today, this is kind of the guts of where we're going. The problem oftentimes is distraction will lead us away from our ultimate purpose, and oftentimes it's simply because we allow ourselves to be fully distracted from what matters most to us. In fact, I would say this, and the end goal, again, I've said this throughout the series, isn't so that you become more of anything political or just more opinionated or any of those kind of things. At the end of the day, though, I think people who are followers of Jesus embody what it looks like to be active in the world. And what's hard is everything around you is pulling at your attention. And if part of your role as a human being is naming and framing and then reframing and creating in the world, right? If this is part of what Jesus has designed us to be in the world, then when we find ourselves distracted, and this happens in the very beginning of Genesis, we see this. When you find yourself distracted, ultimately you are finding yourself slightly pulled away from your ultimate purpose here. And so going all the way back to Genesis, we talked about Genesis 1, we looked at creation, we looked at these sort of things. But then you get like this sort of fun narrative that you were given as a kid. So let me say this out the gate. When you read in Genesis 3, which we're going to look at, the question I used to get all the time was like, do you really believe that snakes talk? And I was like, I've never seen a snake talk, but I know that the poetry and the beauty of Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 have an enemy to all that is good that is naming and reframing in a different direction, right? And so in Genesis chapter 3, we get this really fascinating picture where you have Adam and Eve, the whole thing, and sin entering into the world. And here's what it says. And there's this small part in here that's so, I think, clear to what this looks like. It says, now the serpent, who would ultimately be the enemy in this narrative, was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made, which I just think is the best like descriptor of what this looks like. Like he's just crafty, cunning, smart, brilliant, twisting, crafty. He says to the woman, and this is sort of the crux of what this looks like as they move forward in it. Did God really say, right? Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? Now this is one of those like fascinating things that scholars talk about and debate over all the time, which I think is so interesting. But at the core of the original sort of sin coming into the world, and this is so subversive in the text, it's so pretty, what you find is a questioning of what God has already set into motion, and is this the way that it should be? And I'll tell you this, right? When you're a kid and you're given this sort of story and what this all looks like, you have it so deeply personified that you feel the weight of it. But let me say this. As an adult, very few people go back and read Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and find themselves in the story. You assumed that was for kids at bedtime to convince them not to do bad things, or bad things would happen to them. And at the crux of this isn't really that. At the crux of this is that there is an enemy coming and pulling you away from God's best. And this is what's so fascinating about this. And in the midst of it, using this naming, reframing, subduing to pull away in this crafty way around God's purpose. So he goes on and says this. It says, the woman says to the serpent, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. And then she responds back, but God did say, like I feel like I'm pretty confident, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it or you will die. And this is what, again, is so interesting, and I talk to people who are followers of Jesus, like this is one of the fascinating things to me, is at the guts of this, it wasn't like an original question of like, what did God actually say? At the core of this was like, no, I'm pretty sure this is what God said. I'm pretty sure that this is pretty clear. This is what this is. And then the next verse shows the response of the craftiness of the enemy saying this. It says, you will not certainly die. The serpent said to the woman, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be, and can we just say this together for fun for me? You'll be like God, right? You'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And this is the part that I think is so fascinating, depending on your personality wiring. This is the part that's so fascinating to me. It's not just that you get to be God-like. It's that you get to know more. It's that there's almost like this secret mystery that you get to now be a part of. And there's this compelling thing that draws you away from where you should be. Now, this is one of those things that I think is so fascinating because at the core of so many of the issues that I think we find culturally in our country, all these sorts of things, at the core of this is two desires, right? It's two desires that you've had since you were like in middle school. And that's to be fully sort of in the know and accepted. And you would never say like God-like. And at the same time, what most of us would say is that we still want to be the ultimate authority in our own lives. And at the core of this isn't anything new. Like from the beginning of all of this, the core tension when it comes to sin or moving away from God's best in the world, these kinds of things, are two very specific things. That there is something that is pulling us in a direction away from God's best that is deeply connected, and almost is deeply connected to your desire for full autonomy in your life. And at the same time, to be in whatever the know is of what it all is and what it all means and what it all looks like. In fact, when I talk to people about faith, this is one of those kind of core tensions that you could talk about all of the things that exist here about faith, which are such great conversations and so good to have. And that's what I geek out on at Chick-fil-A at 2:00 in the afternoon. You know what I mean? Like this is what I do for fun, you know? But when you get all the way down to the layers of what people are genuinely talking about, what you find are two core desires when it comes to sin. The first desire is that I could be like God, or ultimately fully autonomous in my decision making and being. And then the second thing is that I could know all of it. It's half truths and ambiguity around the two things. Now, I put in my notes, I said it this way. I said the greatest enemy, ultimately, to your current and future successes are the distractions that have gripped your heart, specifically in the form of these two principles or these two desires. Now, here's why I think this matters so much for you, right? And that it's not just about a snake talking to someone else, right? I think this matters so much for us because at the core of this, we all have a desire in some form or fashion to be autonomous being in our life without submission to just about anything. And then secondly, most of us have some version of this that expresses itself, is that I want to be the one fully in the know. And when you have that desire, which is good, it pulls us forward in a lot of ways. But if that's the ultimate desire, what you find yourself in is never fully and finally knowing. And you find a block where it comes to actual faith. And so most of our distractions, and I think this is what this looks like for many of us, most of our distractions are pulling us away from what it looks like to be fully submitted to God with the practical parts of our lives, and what it looks like to be fully submitted to God when it comes to trusting him in some of those gaps. I put in my notes, I said it this way. I said, it is possible for you to be financially successful, admired by others, experience adventure, have thousands of friends online, move to the top of your company, be extraordinarily confident, watch the Buckeyes win a national championship, and that joke worked a lot better in Detroit with the Lions. You know what I mean? Because they've never won anything. Anyway, so there's that. And still miss it, right? And still get to the end of your life and go, I got all of the things and still miss it. And here's how you know this. You know this because you've seen it. You've seen people have more than you have, chase things further than you did, get all the way to the end of whatever those things were, and still miss the things that mattered most to them. Which means this, and this is where we're going with kind of all of this, is this. You have a gift as a human. And the gift that you have been given, and all of us have been given this gift, is the gift of focus. That at the end of the day, of all of the things that you can pursue, and all of the things that you can look at, you in any given moment in the present are choosing focus on something. I put it in my notes this way, that your focus ultimately is a finite commodity that you are gifted with stewarding. That you are gifted the ability to focus on what matters. And you were given the freedom to choose whether you're going to do it or not. And not only are you given the gift, but secondly, I put in my notes, I was like, and you're responsible for what you do with it. And and anytime we try to wiggle out of that, your kids remind you of your responsibility with that, right? Your friends remind you of this. Your spouse reminds you of how you should have been focused on taking out the trash on Friday at 8:30 a.m. because you didn't last week and now there's 2 loads of it. That was me. There's a little bit of that. You are reminded of your responsibility when there's gaps. And the last one is this, and I really think this is true, and you're also held accountable to it. That somewhere along the way, however the world has been wired and set in motion, there is a functional piece to you going, I am both responsible and I am accountable to what I give my focus to. And in Genesis 3, when you have the craftiness of a serpent pulling away, what you find isn't just an area of trust where there's a gap. You find an area of focus around truth and what it should be. So my two questions around this, and then we're going to talk about this a little bit further at the end, is this: what gets your best focus? All right, what gets your best focus? Which means this: you have times of the day, areas of the day where you are at your best. All right, for some of you, where are my morning people at? I want to see where are my morning people. There's all of our setup team right there. That's great. Yeah, morning people, you get this, right? Where are my night owl, evening people? Where are you at? Yeah. Do we have anybody that 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you're just killing it? Anybody? Yeah, Cindy. Yeah, you're right there. Yeah, that's so great. I love it. I'm so jealous. 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I can't figure out in the middle of the day. You know what I mean? 2 o'clock, it's not happening. So I help with it by getting donuts and stuff. That usually helps your attention and focus. It's good. More sugar and bread. Yeah, it feels good. Yeah, it feels good. But there's part of this where I go who or I guess what gets your best focus, right? What gets your best focus? There's a book by Carey Nieuwhof that was so helpful for me. It's called At Your Best. And he talks about how you got to figure out how to get the most important parts of your life sort of in the area or the window of time where you can give it your best, right? The best that you can do that's what you got to do. How do you restructure your Saturday to do that sort of thing? How do you restructure your evenings to give your best to your spouse? How many of you are married to the opposite of you when it comes to morning and evening person? Anybody else? Yeah. So let's just all stretch your hands and pray for these couples. Yeah, you feel it. I have a friend that's like that, and they were talking to me the other day, and they were like, I really am excited to talk to my spouse at 9:45, and she looks at me as if she's just falling asleep, And I was like, be more interesting. No, I'm kidding. There's a piece of this where it's no, it's a real thing. Emily tells me all the time, she goes, once I start the sleep process, there is nothing you can do. There's just not. And but there's a part of this where you go what does it look like to give my best focus? What gets your best focus? All right, some of you, if you're really honest, what you've done is you've structured your life fully around climbing a ladder, and what gets your best focus and your best energy is whatever it is with your job. Some of you, that actually is true with your kids. You're I want to give my best focus here, but I don't, and I feel like I can't, and I don't know how to rewire my focus that direction. For some of you, come on, I talk to people all the time, and we'll have conversations about what does it look like to have a relationship with God? What are the practical disciplines around this? And I love it when night people come to me, and they're I got up at 6:30 in the morning to have my quiet time. I'm that's not going to go real well, You can't fight the rhythms of your mind, body sometimes. It just sort of is. Where do you get your best focus? For those of you who are followers of Jesus in the room, I love asking this question to people, but I'll ask people sometimes over coffee. I'm when was the last time, the time that you set aside to focus on your relationship with Jesus was during whatever window was at your best? When was the last time that you did that? When was the last time you calendar out the ability to say, I have all of these other distractions, but I'm going to give my best focus here? We've talked about this when it comes to the work that you do all the time, but I would say to you, when it comes to what you were put here to do, when was the last time that got the best focus that you had to give? And the other one is this, and this one's a harder one, I think, sometimes to answer. What gets your best focus? The other one is this, who gets your best focus? And this is one of the most painful things, right? For those of you who are extroverts, just be honest, where are my extroverts at in the room? Where are you at? All the extroverts, just be proud. Yeah, you are. And then introverts, let's see you real quick, slowly raising your hand like me, yeah. Yeah, introverts, this is less for you, but there's just a piece of you that goes, I want so many people to have my best. And some of you, for the first time today, you're going to hear somebody look at you and go, you just can't do that for everybody. You can't. You're not at your best all the time. You don't have your best energy for everyone. Who gets your best focus? I think this is a really important idea to have. When was the last time you said no, this sounds really hard, no to a person around whatever it was so that you could say yes to the person that God's already put in your sphere of influence to influence and have the kind of relationship that you need to have with? When was the last time you said no? Many times, and I feel this sometimes too, is when you're a people pleaser to a degree, and most all of us are, and it's hard to go, I'm going to intentionally disappoint someone so that I can give my best focus in one area or one place. Some of you, there's a family member that you need to say no to so that you can say yes to the family members that live in your home. Some of you, there's a friendship that you need to say no to for a season in terms of the depth and time so that you can say yes to a friend that God has put in your life to influence in a powerful way. Some of you need to be able to say those kinds of things. Some of you who are leaders, come on, maybe it's been a long time since you've heard this again, but not everybody that you lead can get your best focus. When was the last time you focused your energy on the people that you needed to focus on to do what it is that you needed to do on behalf of everyone else? When was the last time that you decided who gets your best focus? So I'll tell you the way that this works for me. I think I probably always struggle with this to a degree, both the what and the who. That's just part of my wiring and personality. I'm both an introvert and I love to be around people. So I tell people, like, sometimes I say I'm an introvert and people are like, oh, Sundays must be so hard for you. I'm like, Sundays are awesome. I freaking love it. I get to talk to everybody. I have like 150 37-second conversations, which is fun, and it's so great. Like it's the best thing in the world. And then I go home at roughly 2-ish or 3-ish o'clock, and I sit on the couch and I rewatch the Braves game while my son is playing a video game, and then I'll do that. And then a lot of times I'll start my day on Mondays reading a book by myself or going to see a movie. Don't tell anybody I do this. Just keep this here. But I'll go see a movie and I'll take my laptop with me and I'll sit in the back. So it's a dark room. It's a little creepy for them, but we just got past it at this point. So I sit in the back, full on working in the dark, quiet room with a massive TV of a movie I care nothing about, and so I recharge that way. But I guess when we first started our church, I've learned this in so many different seasons, but I would say there's always some version of pressure that we feel on the things that seem like they're worthy distractions. You know what I mean? That there are things that you do that feel like a worthy distraction. I tell people sometimes, like, news is one of these things. No one would ever say, I don't want to be in the know. No one has ever said that before. Right? And at the same time, I could spend the entire day in real time knowing the news on Twitter or whatever version I get it from, I'd never let up on it, which means that 10, 15, 20% of my brain is up to date on whatever just happened in Missouri with people that I'll never know and be able to never do anything about, but that I'll just feel it. I have an emotional capacity in some way to do that, right? And what I realized early on as we were starting our church, I realized nothing was getting my full attention in the present moment. And what happened for me, and it may be a little bit different for you, but what happened for me along the way is when that started to happen, and the more that it started to happen, what I realized is I would give 50 to 60% of my presence in whatever room I was in to who was there. And then somewhere else over here, I wasn't fully present and I was distracted. I was distracted by pressure. I was distracted by people pleasing. I was distracted by, wanting to grow something. I was distracted by DMX cables. That was this morning. I was distracted by all these sorts of things. If you know, distracted by all these sorts of things. And then I realized that living your life where 20 to 30% of your brain is always somewhere else is a great way to never fully engage with whoever God has put in front of you. I had a pastor that was, at the time that I was working with him, was probably in his mid-60s, and he used to tell me all the time, he's like, you need to walk slow in whatever hallway you're in, and you need to walk, slow wherever you're going. And we were in Detroit at the time, and I always laughed, like, no one walks slow here, and you get run over if you do that. There's a little bit of that. And what he was talking about was so good. He was like, whatever is happening matters, but you don't have the capacity to influence the things that are not here and now. Like, as much as I want to fix problems at 8:45 on a Tuesday night, most of them I can't, and you can't either. And most of the things that your marriage needs aren't going to be solved when you are at work worried about them. They're going to be more solved when you get home and you've turned off whatever it looks like for you to turn it off and be present with whoever's in front of you. Your greatest influence with your kids aren't going to be the pithy one-liners that you steal from a book. It's going to be the number of times that you look in their eyes rather than on a black screen in front of you. And at the end of the day, when it comes to all of these sorts of things, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to business, when it comes to people, when it comes to your family, all of this, is I still believe that just like in the early parts of Genesis, as sin enters the world, the craftiness of this is getting after your need for importance, the godlike thing, and also causing you, and don't miss this, causing you to want to just fully know all of the things. And so what I did, and this is straight out of my journal, so you could probably come up with 40 more that are better questions for you, but these are like a handful of the questions that I am constantly working through when it comes to the distraction side. And the first one is this: does God ever get my full attention? Right? For those of you who are followers of Jesus, I think this is a really important question to ask, right? Does God ever get your full attention? Now, some of you, and I love this, somebody told me this when I was younger, they said a version of this. They were like, if you are going into a quiet time and you fall asleep, that might be the best thing that you needed for the first part of that week. Great. That is as spiritual as anything else, right? Now, if you do that every time, that might be a problem with your sleep or the amount of coffee that you drink at 8:45 at night, right? There's a little bit of that. But does God ever get your full attention? Or a better question we could ask this way: when was the last time that God got your full attention? Or even harder to answer, when was the last time that God got your full attention, not because of a life circumstance that drew you to needing him, right? When was the last time that God got your full attention? The other one is this, and this one's a hard one for me to answer a lot of times. What sin am I becoming slowly callous to? Right? When I don't give my attention to what matters most, what will happen in my heart is I will become more and more okay with things that are not okay. Right? What sin am I slowly becoming callous to? People make fun of us sometimes, which I love. This is one of my favorite things. There are things that we watch that would probably shock people, and then there are things that we don't watch that equally shock people. I think this is always so fun. So now I just don't talk about movies that I see. But people tease us. They're like, there are things that we want to feel shocked by. There are things that I never want to be callous to, right? So we talk about this at our home, and it's always a little bit awkward. And I would say for the most part, I would just give us an out in case we've messed up or we haven't. But like in general, we don't watch TV shows or movies where they cheat on each other, no matter how great the story is. Now, you know how many things that knocks out of the way that you can't watch? It drives me. That's why I watch so much of The Braves. That's what it is. So there's a little bit of that. And here's why. And I'm not saying you should do that. I'm saying for us, we go like, that matters to us because I never want to feel callous to it. I always wanted to make me a little bit angry and a little bit angsty. I don't even think that's a real word, but I want to feel that, you know? I want to feel that. I used to watch like really violent movies and it didn't bother me. And I had a friend one time, his name was Zach. He's one of my best friends. And he said, it's so funny how you won't watch this, but the equivalent of that when it comes to violence is this. You've become really okay with watching people die. And I was like, that is a morbid and wildly true thing to say. Do you know what I'm saying? And I thought about like, that's true. That's true. Like when was the last time that you looked and you go, the sin of things, it bothered you? That the weight of your own sin in your own life bothered you because you are good and I am good about distracting myself just enough to where those things just seem like they exist and you disagree with them. But disagreement with something is different from feeling the weight of what it carries. And distraction pulls you in those places all the time. What sin are you becoming callous to? I'm always asking myself this question. I ask myself this question once a week. But what part of my schedule is working against me? Or more importantly, working against what I most want for my life, right? And so I know this. There are times that I have freedom to do things that not everybody gets to have, and I understand that. But I would say like one of the practical ways about this is Emily and I talk a lot about like how is the schedule working. So we have 3 kids, and one of them is 2, and just it's almost like he injects himself with caffeine on a daily basis. You know what I mean? We're in that hitting phase, and he's in a perfect height to ruin my day. You know, there's a little bit of that. And so we do that. And so I kind of laugh like, so we have that, and we have Eleanor who's like 5 and doing things now, and Henry's doing stuff. He's like, but we have this conversation like, what does it look like in our family, and where are the parts that the schedule works against us? And fellas, I'll just tell you this, and we'll talk about this more in, I think 4 weeks from now, but One of the best questions you could ever ask your spouse, one of the best questions you could ever ask is going, what's the best way that I could serve you this week or in this season? And those answers will change. Those answers will change with all sorts of variables and circumstances and family stuff and all that kind of stuff. And we try to have this conversation. I'll just say, like, we make these really practical shifts along the way. Like, so one of the things for us, and this is us, this is not you. I don't think you should do what we do. I just say, like, this is how we process it. We realized early on that I have a gift with putting Oliver to sleep. And I think it's because he doesn't like me as much as he likes Emily, but don't tell him I said that. You know what I mean? Like, there's a little bit, he'll just go to sleep with me. He's like, peace, smoking a cig in the back. No, I'm just kidding. That'd be funny. I don't know why. It's a weird thing. Funny, but weird. But he goes to sleep. And so I started putting the kids to bed at night. And so, which brought up a lot of questions. And like, well, how many nights are we going to miss between 7 and 9 p.m.? And we set a number. And I would say it's not that we never break it, because sometimes you have to break it, but we feel it when we do, right? Some of you, and you would never say this out loud, but you haven't launched the thing that God called you to launch simply because you haven't asked this question. What part of my schedule is working against the work that God has put me here to do? What part of my schedule that I've allowed as a distraction is working against what God has called me to do with my family, right? And then the one that's hard, and I mentioned this earlier, and I would say this is one for me. This is true of a lot of family members, is do I see the eyes of people more than I see the glass of a screen? Now, I am all about smartphones, so I would go I buy the Apple products as they come out, and I clap for Tim Cook when he does it, and I clap for Steve even in the grave. I'm a big fan of all the things. But can I just tell you something? And I'll say this to you 20 times a year, right? Right? I think, this is me, I think you should quantify it. Everything else is an opinion about yourself. I want you to quantify it. And the great thing is your phone will tell you, right? I want you to quantify. And I want you to look, how much time do I spend in front of a glass screen versus the eyes of a human being in front of me? And I'll just tell you this, and this is a question. I'll talk to empty nesters sometimes. They're like, yeah, that's for the 20 and 30 or 40 something. I'm like, my mom, don't tell her I said this, but she'll watch this in about an hour and a half. My mom will be on the phone a lot. And she'll tell you this too. Like, it's hard for her, right? This is true at every age. Anybody who's got a smartphone, there's a version of this, that you are being pulled in some sort of distractive nature. And one of the hardest things to do is to look in the eyes of the person that's in front of you and allow that moment to be the most present version of yourself. And the other hard work around this, and I'll just be really blunt, so you guys email somebody else about this, but I'll just be really blunt with you. And you also have to work at disengaging the part of your mind that's still tethered to the things that are on that device too. Which means if you're still worried about your email, that doesn't mean that you are just a great worker. It means you have an addiction, right? Right, if you're still like, I gotta know what everybody's up to, right? Or whatever that is, and I'm just saying, that's not you being more connected. That's an addiction that you have to distraction away from what's most important to you. And for those of you who are not followers of Jesus, I would tell you this, and I talk about this a lot. Of all the questions that you'll ask over the course of your life, at some point along the way, and if you're here, you're probably asking it at least to a degree. Well, all the questions that you'll ask and hopefully in some form or fashion answer, none of them will impact or shape your life more than who is God, does he exist, and what is Christianity actually about? Which means when I talk about your relationship with God to people who are followers of Jesus, what I would look at you and say, at some point along the way, you will either lean into those questions or not. But until you do, I think most people are at some level distracted or pulled away over here from the questions that will actually most shape your life. So I'm gonna look at one more passage and then we'll wrap up here in just a second. But there's the Bible called Proverbs. This particular part of Proverbs is one of my favorites. I'll talk about this in various times through the year, in different ways. Proverbs chapter 4 is in a lot of ways like father-son-ish talking. And you get this really fascinating, beautiful sort of part of this. In verse 25, it says this. It says, let your eyes look straight ahead and fix your gaze directly before you. Which, again, those of you who are followers of Jesus, can I just tell you, the most important posture I think you could have is open-handed submission with your eyes fixed on what matters most. Fixed ahead of you, directly before you, and give careful thought to the paths of your feet, or to the strokes of your thumb thing, or to the comments, or what you allow to occupy the CPU brain space in your mind. And be steadfast in all your ways, which means that culturally, when it is pull this direction, you're like, did he really say? Is it really this? Like, I feel like I know what this says. That doesn't mean that you don't deconstruct and reconstruct your faith and you're looking at this thing. That's not what that means. But it says, like, at the end of the day, I'm gonna lean into true and honest thinking. I'm gonna be steadfast in those ways. And do not turn from the right or to the left, and keep your foot from evil, which more bluntly in the original language is more about not being like everyone else in the culture that's moving in a direction away from what God has. So, put in mind to say this way, and this is where we'll wrap up at this. Your focus is a finite commodity that you were gifted with stewarding. And the last thing is embrace the stewardship of your focus and attention. All right, so here's what I'm gonna tell you to do, and we're gonna wrap up here in just a second. And you're gonna we're all gonna go out and do fun things today, I'm sure, and tomorrow. People were lighting fireworks last night in our neighborhood at 9:45, so I walked out and thanked them. That was pretty great. I'm just kidding, I didn't do that, but that'd be pretty great, right? You're gonna leave here and you're gonna go and you're gonna have a great week. And here's what I know and here's what you know is this. This can feel emotional when whatever the things are that bubble up in this room, and then you leave and you kind of feel it, but you kind of don't. Most of us go back into a pattern or that we're kind of in. So here's what I'm gonna ask you to do over the course of this week. And this is gonna take some thought on your part. But what I want you to do is I want you to identify not all of them or 10 of them. I want you to identify one thing in your life or your week that is a consistent distraction. Right? So just for a second, I'd love for you to think about that. Like, what is it for you? Like, be honest with yourself. Like, what is it? Some of you like immediately knew. Some of you are like, I don't know. I don't really have one. And your spouse is going, Netflix. It's Netflix. It's whatever it is. Like, whatever that is for you. What's the one distraction that you tend to have consistently? Anyway, I want you to think about that. And here's what I'm gonna ask you to do. And this is kind of the bolder part of this. I don't know what you're gonna do, but I want you to disrupt it to the point that you feel it. Which means like Netflix is just a funny example and a really easy one to pick at. But I'd go like, if it's Netflix for you, I did this one time because I watched a lot of TV at one point. I took a piece of tape and I wrote in a Sharpie on my remote, which is the only way because I couldn't figure out how to do it on the actual TV, but that's a different, anyway. I put it on the remote and I just put the word stop and it was on the remote and it was disruptive. I said, for 1 week, every time I pick up the remote, I'm gonna stop. And I'm like, and I didn't do it. No, I'm just kidding. I did. I stopped doing it. And I put the remote down and I'd sit there, and this is the fun part. You ready? I would sit there bored. And you know what happened? Is when you get a little bit bored, your heart becomes very apparent to you. Some of you don't remember the last time that you were in silence because the last times that you were alone, including the bathroom, what you hear is the first 3 seconds of a video before you scroll to the next one. I was in the bathroom the other day. I heard that in the stall next to me. I'm like, dude. No, but that one's a funny one. That's a funny one. Watch that. But I was like, there's a little bit of like, come on, you know this. You don't remember the last time that you were in silence. So I'm going to say, disrupt that. Disrupt it. Some of you, come on, the best advice I've ever been given around, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever given around family, it was a guy who makes 50x what I make. He's one of the best fathers I've ever met. He was a CFO of one of the largest companies in the country. And I said, how do you go do that and then go home, and it's like your kids don't even know. Because I know what that's got to be like, man. I mean, I don't, but I'm like, I imagine. I mean, I watched Succession. You know what I mean? I'm kidding. There's a little bit of like, I know that. And he goes, here's what I did. I picked a McDonald's on the way home. And I said, that was my disruptor. When I hit McDonald's, I'm gonna turn it off. And that gave me 2.5 miles to drive the rest of the way home and turn on whatever needed to turn on to walk in the door and be the dad that my girls needed. You have to disrupt those distractions. And the people that you admire have figured this out. The parents that you're like, man, they're great. They didn't stumble into it. They disrupted those patterns and they figured it out. If you're here and you can't remember the last time that you gave God your full attention, here's what you do. It's so easy. You grab your Bible. And if you don't have one, tell me. I give Bibles out like candy. It's one of my favorite things. I'll buy it for you. I'll send it to your house. You get your Bible, an actual one, and you set it there. And day one, and my phone's in the other room. I'm not doing other things. I'm gonna sit here with my Bible. And I tell people all the time, and if you don't want to read it the first day, that's fine. Sit there and be bored for 12 minutes with it sitting there. And then I'm gonna come back the next day. And then bored the next time. I did this with somebody who was interested in Christianity, and finally they did it, and they opened for the first time. Like, I just opened it and just sat it there, like, I'm gonna read the first time, and they opened it to Song of Solomon. I was like, don't start there. Don't start there. That's not the place to start. But start at Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. That's a great spot. But I'd say, but disrupt whatever it is that's distracting you. I'll tell you this one, and this is my last one, and we'll wrap up. If it comes to your kids, and I'm in my mid-30s, everybody, I think a lot of these people I know feel this, and it's your phone, and you know it's your phone, but you want to be honest about that part. I'll tell you that one of the best things that I did recently is I put, this sounds so cheesy. I'm not even recommending this. That's what I did. You ever heard this country song, You're Gonna Miss This? You know this one? You're gonna miss it. Yeah, I'm from South Carolina. It comes out sometimes. Anyway, at one point, for a few days, I put the lyrics to that on my phone. So every time I open my phone, I intentionally made myself, we'll just say fast forward to the future. Some of you would say feel guilty. And I was like, it's both. And it's right. And I put it down. And I frustrated people because I didn't get back fast enough on something. I'm not good with text anyway, but that made it worse. And I'll just tell you this. This is my one thing for you this week. Disrupt whatever is distracting you. You already know what's important. Disrupt it. Whatever it is. And lean into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray before we head out. We're going to do one last thing before we leave. But I want to pray for us, and then we'll head out. So if you would close your eyes just for a second. I'll have you to bow your heads for a second. Before I pray, I want you to name whatever the thing is. What's the one thing? Most of you know immediately. What's the one thing that you're going to disrupt when it comes to your distraction? What is that distraction? And what's the one thing that you're going to do? And then the last one is this. And this is what I'm going to ask you to do. It's today. I'm going to ask you to. And who are you going to tell that you're doing it? Tell one or two people that you're doing the thing so that you have accountability to it. What is that thing? Let me pray for us, and we'll wrap up. Father, we thank you so much that you make it so clear for us in a lot of ways what it looks like to follow you. And not in that all of our steps are just laid out and we know it, not like that, but you make it clear what it looks like to enter in and be in the world in the ways that you've called us to. And God, I pray for all of us in this, that when we fast forward a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, that the things that we find ourselves grateful for aren't that we were more disciplined, or that we were striving to just be better, those kinds of things. But God, that we would open-handedly fix the posture of our hearts and our minds to be focused on you. God, I pray in advance for the businesses and nonprofits and works that will be created over the next year, not because people lacked courage, but because they lacked the focus to lean into it. And we just ask that you would bless those things. Father, I pray for the families and the people that are in the room that are married or they have kids, and this is a thing for them. God, we pray in advance that you would bless the efforts around leaning in to to what matters most and that you would speak so clearly to them. God, there's a lot of us in the room who are single, and there's all sorts of distractions that we feel, that we're looking at when it comes to relationships, all this kind of stuff. God, I pray that you would help them just in the silence or in the stillness or in the pause to hear with such deep clarity whatever steps that you would have them to take. And God, I pray that through those practices that you would heal our hearts. And God, that you would make clear your will to us and that you would keep us from the kind of sin that entangles us and causes us to stumble. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.